Welcome everybody to Vilnius. It's been a long time that we've been looking forward to this event, so it's exciting that it's actually happening today. The field of cultural heritage conservation is driven by the resolute dedication to pursue more accurate knowledge, achieve more sophisticated results, and to build on the work of the generations before us to preserve the objects and places of humanity for future generations. As cultural heritage practitioners and scientists, you'd all agree that we're especially sensitive to threats and we're very risk adverse. Our profession is predisposed to be engaged with the moral and ethical imperative of our time to meet the challenges of climate change. The cultural heritage conservation profession is increasingly aware of the urgency of climate change, scrutinizes our unsustainable approaches and seeks alternatives to environmentally hazardous and waste-generating methods. In our choices in both private and public spheres, we're reassessing our practices and consumption to minimize our environmental impact. The philosophical concepts and ethical values that guide our field are adapting to these new imperatives, prioritizing sustainability in our practice and climate resilience in our planning. The cultural heritage field understands that global warming is a risk multiplier that will amplify threats and vulnerabilities to our shared cultural heritage, which is a priceless and non-renewable human resource. The demand for green and sustainable approaches and technologies for art conservation has intensified in the past decade. Significant resources have been dedicated to creating frameworks and multifaceted plans on how to address the impact of climate change on cultural heritage, enshrined in policy documents such as ICOMOS' Declaration on Environmental Guidelines, the UN's 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals, and the European Green Deal that Dr. Stan just spoke of. The UN's 2030 Agenda, SDG 11 for Sustainable Cities and Communities, Target 11.4 calls for stakeholders to, quote, strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, which explicitly addresses the balanced relationship between cultural heritage and natural heritage as two components that must both be preserved, framing and emphasizing cultural heritage as an integral and equal part of the human environment. In the ICOMOS 2019 report titled The Future of Our Pasts, discussion about the challenge to bridge the theoretical and practical gap between cultural heritage and climate change occurs, stating that cultural heritage is, quote, an asset to be protected from climate impacts and also a resource to strengthen the ability to pursue transformative change. The report also includes the monition to develop strong climate actions to preserve cultural heritage without setting up the win-lose dynamic of heritage versus climate action. The 2030 UNESCO updated policy document on climate action for World Heritage expresses also how climate action must lead to transformative change to safeguard cultural heritage and affirms that world cultural heritage can be an exemplar of climate action and a catalyst for change. The American Institute for Conservation's Held in Trust working group on philosophy and ethics in conservation contributed to the report outlining how new approaches, decision-making, hierarchies of authority, and new areas of knowledge need to be integrated into our guidance, linking climate change and social justice. So addressing climate change is quite multifaceted and complex, and policy efforts have focused up until now mainly on raising awareness, adjusting museum environmental practices, curation and lending practices, rather than developing new material approaches. Despite the urgent demand of conservators, the conservation field lacks empowering green technologies, especially in cleaning treatments, which will be the focus of today's symposium. We've only just begun to develop methodologies and technologies that will effectively improve the sustainability of our practices. And we have yet to equip conservators with adequate tools and resources to address new problems linked to the climate change, unsustainable living, and social unrest that increasingly threaten intangible cultural heritage. In fact, conservators now encounter fragile and untreatable surfaces where contaminants such as soot from smoke and fire or vandalism cannot be removed by conventional means at all. Sorry, I should have changed the slide, but I didn't. Another critical factor to consider in sustainability is the health and well-being in the workplace, reflected in the UN's SDG 3, Target 3.9, to reduce illness from hazardous chemicals and pollution. Conservators have long sought to improve their working conditions and reduce exposure to endocrine disruptors such as organic solvents and plastics. Green chemistry and technologies can address the health risks associated with our field while supporting the sustainable preservation of cultural heritage, with also an eye towards inclusivity, since Indigenous communities may consider using organic solvents or plastics unacceptable for their sacred objects. It's clear that cultural heritage is uniquely positioned to be a societal driver for transformational change. So with this, in this context, I welcome you to this Vilnius 2024 Symposium, which brings together expertise from 3 European research projects. Moxy, GoGreen, and GreenArt, all funded under the Horizon Europe call for green technologies and materials for cultural heritage. Pooled together, these 3 projects, the Green Cluster for Science and Conservation Research, represents over 50 institutions of excellence that conduct research with wide-ranging ambitions to define green conservation and innovate with new materials, methodologies, and technologies. The Green Cluster will collaborate as an expert network to advise, develop new knowledge, and advocate to lead the green transformation and support next generation of emerging researchers, scientists, and conservation practitioners. We want to acknowledge also the leadership on the part of our Horizon Project Officer, Thanos Girakis, for supporting the Green Cluster's formation and initiatives. A continuous thread through the Green Cluster research projects is life cycle thinking, which is being explored and pioneered as a new approach to conservation decision-making in the cultural heritage field. We're finding opportunities to leverage the life cycle assessment results to identify environmental hotspots or optimize our practices in product design and investigate how LCA could be better tailored to our specific needs. The mid-century quote, "We shape our tools and then our tools shape us," conceptually resonates very much for the art conservation field, where the innovation of instrumentation and equipment is of fundamental importance for refining our means of understanding and treating artworks. The Green Cluster aims to develop exciting new concepts for new materials, analytical methods, and technology for sustainable conservation, drawing on research in chemistry, conservation science, plasma science, sustainability science, and even space science. It's the goal to support technology transfer from the research stage to the bench and to help accelerate the research, development, commercialization, uptake continuum to create new tools that will shape us and therefore will open new research and treatment pathways to expedite the green paradigm shift. Developing effective fire damage remedies as emergency preparedness is an acknowledged priority in the era of global warming. Ever more frequent wildfires and arson related to social unrest forewarn us of future challenges that the climate change will exacerbate. The Moxy project that I'm involved in personally is investigating atomic oxygen for the non-contact cleaning and remediation of soot and fire damage of previously untreatable materials, such as porous mineral materials like plaster or alabaster, friable media like pastels or modern paints, woven and non-woven textiles and paper, animal-sourced materials like feathers, silk, or ivory, plastics, modern experimental media, and all with challenging geometries and intricate topographies. And the Green Cluster as a group plans to continue our collaborative work to address this aspect in future research. Another fundamental aspect of the Green Cluster projects is disseminating our research objectives, goals, and aspirations and results to amplify this work to the general public, conservation students, conservators, and scientific professionals. This is conducted through social media, conference presentations, training, scientific publications. And we encourage you all to explore the project websites where you may read more in-depth about the origins and research and results of each project, and follow the joint collaborative work of the Green Cluster for Science and Conservation Research. The Green Cluster will also jointly advocate for impact on European policy and funding for green conservation research. The Moxy project annually updates a sustainability policy brief regarding impacts of sustainability research on European policy, as Dr. Stan spoke of previously. So we are excited to share all of our findings today with this audience in Vilnius, Lithuania, the Baltic region, and beyond. We look forward to a lively discussion of Moxy, GoGreen, and GreenArt research and the inspiring possibilities of this new venture of the Green Cluster to advance and coordinate our joint mission to lead green transformation and cultural heritage, empower practitioners with new knowledge, technology, and methodology. Thank you.
Hello. Nina, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted an interesting question that maybe you could just say a few words. Well, as we know, we all strive for green and sustainable approaches, but also, you know, what do we define as green and how do we measure it? So, and there are various tools in industry how to measure like greenness of the technology of material, and it's like commonly like life cycle assessment, which you mentioned. Mm-hmm. But those methods are designed for industry, like for some repeated applications where the process and material is always the same, and it's kind of simply to measure those. But in cultural heritage, we have all the materials are different, they age differently, they're composed of very different materials, and those tools are being implemented at conservation. But what do you see the difficulties are, like taking already existing methods, like life cycle assessment, and how can we transfer it to conservation? What are the limitations? Maybe a few thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was saying, I think we need to learn how, and we're working with life cycle assessors that are professional, and they usually work with industry, as Thomas mentioned, to kind of help guide their product design. Our product design is much more limited in use, and it also has to take into account that we are working towards the conservation of another important part of the human environment. So again, it was kind of getting back to that idea of we don't want to create heritage conservation versus the natural environment. There are two components that need to be equally considered, and this is sort of a new aspect that our life cycle assessment experts are working with now to try to adapt their systems to accommodate that as a new factor in their assessment.
Thank you. Then